A millionaire found an unconscious girl in the park and took her to his mansion. When she woke up, everyone was shocked. "Miss, wake up, can you hear me? Please don't take me back there." Julian West's voice trembled with urgency as he knelt beside the motionless woman sprawled across the wet grass. Her breath came in shallow, fading wisps. Her skin was pale, and her hands were ice-cold. Without thinking, he unwrapped the scarf from his neck and gently placed it around her shoulders, then removed his coat and carefully draped it over her trembling body. Julian was not the kind of man who wandered through city parks after dark, but tonight was different. After an unexpected site inspection at a remote property he was considering for a new eco-resort, he had decided to walk off the weight of the day before returning to his penthouse. He had built his empire from the ground up. West Global Hospitality, a name synonymous with luxury and precision. But that night, fate brought him to a place where none of his wealth mattered. She had almost disappeared into the shadows, barely a silhouette on the edge of the path, like a fallen leaf. It was instinct that made him stop. Something about the stillness of her body didn't feel like rest, it felt like surrender. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, as he gently lifted her into his arms. She was feather-light, her head lolling against his shoulder, strands of wet hair clinging to her cheek. Her lips moved again, barely audible. "Don't let them find me." Julian's jaw clenched. He didn't know who they were, but there was no mistaking the fear in her voice. When he arrived at his estate, the staff rushed to his side with wide eyes, but he waved them off. "Guest room. Call Dr. Mason. Tell him it's urgent but discreet." The mansion was quiet, its usual pristine calm disrupted by the presence of a stranger. Julian carried her up the marble staircase himself and laid her down on the guest bed. She murmured softly in her sleep, tossing slightly beneath the blanket he tucked around her. Dr. Mason arrived within 20 minutes. He examined her with clinical precision, checking for broken bones, head trauma, infection, and shock. Julian stood at the doorway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her fragile form. "She's exhausted, dehydrated, and bruised, but nothing life-threatening," the doctor reported. "She needs food, warmth, and rest. Possibly some trauma, mild amnesia, or emotional shock. I'd recommend keeping her calm, hydrated, and under observation for the next 24 hours. "Thank you, I'll take care of her," Julian said, then walked back to her side once the doctor had left. The room was dimly lit, casting soft shadows across her peaceful expression. She looked young, maybe in her mid-20s. There was something undeniably delicate about her, but also something hidden. Her body bore faint marks, faded bruises, old scars, signs of someone who had survived far more than a cold night. As Julian adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, something caught his eye, a faint shape just beneath her hairline, at the back of her neck. He leaned in closer. It was a small tattoo, subtle, stylized. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the symbol. It was a variant, disguised but distinct, of the logo used by the Caldwell Travel Group, one of his fiercest industry competitors, a rival whose operations in emerging countries had come under fire for unethical labor practices and who had, more than once, tried to undercut Julian's projects through shady methods. What were the chances that a woman with this exact symbol, clearly running from something or someone, ended up unconscious just outside his home? Coincidence? A plant? A trap? Or just a broken soul who needed help? Julian sat down in the armchair across the room, elbows on his knees, hands steepled in front of his mouth. He was not a man easily shaken, but tonight something had cracked through the armor he had spent years building. He glanced at her again. The rise and fall of her chest was slow and steady now, peaceful. She was safe here. For now. But who was she? And what storm had she just escaped? As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, Julian remained seated, watching the woman who had, without a word, disrupted everything he thought he knew about control, caution, and chance. He did not yet know her name, but he would. And whether she brought chaos or healing, one thing was already certain: their lives would never be the same again. The scent of fresh linen and lavender filled the quiet room, as morning sunlight filtered gently through cream-colored curtains. Eva stirred beneath the soft duvet, her eyelids fluttering open. For a long moment she stared at the ornate ceiling, disoriented by its unfamiliar elegance. The silence was thick, broken only by the soft ticking of the antique wall clock. She tried to sit up, wincing slightly at the soreness in her body. A faint knock interrupted her thoughts. Julian entered, dressed impeccably in a slate-gray suit without a tie, his expression unreadable but calm. "You're awake," he said quietly, placing a tray on the bedside table. "Water, and something light to eat." Eva gave him a faint nod, her voice rasping. "Thank you." He sat in the chair across from her, his eyes steady. "Can you tell me your name?" There was a pause, then, "Ava." "Just Ava?" She hesitated. "For now." He didn't press. "Do you remember what happened?" Ava shook her head slowly. "Bits and pieces. I remember running, a car, a man yelling, then cold." Julian studied her, but there was no fear in her gaze now, only exhaustion. She looked too tired to lie, or maybe too broken to pretend. "You were in the park near my property, unconscious, injured. I brought you here and had a doctor check you over. You're safe." "Why would you help a stranger?" His answer was simple. "Because you needed help." She turned her head slightly, avoiding his eyes. "You don't even know if I'm dangerous." "I'm still watching," he said, but there was no malice in his tone, just honesty. Over the next few days, Eva remained in the guest suite, regaining strength with rest and small meals. She spoke little, but always politely. The house staff grew fond of her quickly. Mrs. Glynn, the long-time housekeeper, began bringing her fresh flowers. The chef, Matteo, made her special soups and taught her how to fold dumplings in the kitchen. Julian observed from afar. She wasn't demanding, nor did she show any signs of deceit. No calls, no emails, no trace of manipulation. She helped with simple chores around the house, picked up books from the library, and spent hours quietly journaling in the solarium. Still, something didn't sit right with him. On the fourth day, he found her in the garden with Mrs. Glynn, repotting herbs. The sight made him pause. Her hair was pulled back loosely, sleeves rolled to the elbow, dirt on her hands, sun warming her cheeks. She looked like she belonged, but belonging didn't erase questions. Later that evening, Eva passed by his study. He looked up from his laptop, catching a glimpse of her from the corner of his eye. As she turned, her hair shifted, and that's when he saw it again. That mark. He stood abruptly. "Eva!" She froze. "Yes?" "Your neck. May I see something?" Confused, she turned slightly, brushing her hair aside. There it was, a delicate tattoo, inked just beneath the hairline, subtle but familiar. Julian's eyes narrowed. "Where did you get this?" Eva reached instinctively for her neck. I don't remember. Why?" He walked over to a bookshelf, pulled out a binder, and flipped it open to a page clipped from a travel industry journal. On the page, a logo, stylized and corporate, one he knew too well. It was from Harmony Trails, a so-called humanitarian tourism program under Caldwell Global, Julian's fiercest rival in the luxury travel world. On the surface, it was marketed as a way to connect privileged travelers with underserved communities, but Julian had seen through the facade years ago. His private investigations had uncovered exploitative practices masked behind smiling volunteers and photo ops. Children overworked, locals unpaid, stories sanitized for donors. He looked at Eva. "That symbol, it's from one of their pilot projects in Southeast Asia." Eva's face went pale. "I didn't know. You said you didn't remember." "I don't," she said, her voice small. "But maybe I volunteered. I don't know why it's there. I just know I hate it." "Why?" Her hands trembled. "Because every time I see it, I feel ashamed." The words hit him harder than he expected. Julian nodded slowly, the air thick with uncertainty. He wanted to trust her. He wanted to believe she was not planted, was not another pawn sent by Jason Caldwell to infiltrate and sabotage his operations. But how could he? The mark of his enemy was etched into her skin. He said nothing more that night. Eva excused herself quietly, retreating to her room, and Julian, standing alone in his study, stared at the symbol in the fold, then back toward the empty hallway. The question that haunted him was no longer just, who is she, but why does my heart want to protect her when logic tells me to send her away? Julian couldn't pinpoint when it began, when Eva started lingering in his thoughts, or when her quiet presence in a room felt like gravity. Maybe it was the way she moved, always gentle, always present, or how she seemed to listen to people like their words mattered. Even without memory, she poured herself into every small act, helping the gardener prune roses, laughing with the chef in the kitchen, learning to fold dough with clumsy, joyful fingers. The staff adored her. Julian watched from a distance, more drawn to her than he cared to admit, but something held him back. The tattoo, the tie to Caldwell Global, the risk. He couldn't shake the suspicion. He reached out quietly to old contacts, former employees, village leaders, humanitarian networks. He told himself it wasn't distrust, it was protection, for himself, for her. Eva had no idea. She continued to live with quiet purpose. Once at dinner, she spoke about helping a stranger in the market, her voice trailing off as if reaching for a memory she couldn't grasp. Julian said nothing, but something about the way she smiled through the haze chipped at his walls. Still, the doubt lingered, until one rainy afternoon, everything changed. Eva was in the greenhouse tending to herbs when she noticed movement across the hedge. A man, camera in hand, not staff, not familiar. She froze, then ran, not to the house, but straight into the woods. An hour later, Mrs. Glynn called Julian, frantic. Eva was gone. He didn't think, he just ran. The storm had swallowed the sky. He shouted her name again and again, soaked to the bone, heart racing. At the edge of the lake, he saw her, sitting on a bench, small and shaking. "I should have known," she said without looking. "You were watching me. Maybe not you, but someone you sent." Julian stood silent. "I had to be sure," he finally said. She let out a bitter laugh. "Sure of what? That I'm dangerous? That I'm lying?" He didn't answer. "I trusted you," she whispered. "But people like me don't get rescued. We get used. Over and over." Julian stepped closer. "Eva." "No," she said, voice cracking. "I don't even know who I am, but for a while your kindness felt real. I let myself believe I deserved it, but I don't, and I can't be your question mark." She turned, tears mixing with the rain. "I don't want to hurt you, but I won't let myself be hurt again either." Julian watched her walk away, his chest hollow, and for the first time he wondered, was he afraid of danger, or was he afraid of falling in love? The morning air was crisp, but Julian's thoughts were anything but clear. His contact in Singapore had just sent over the final piece of a puzzle he wished he had never started solving. Eva Raines, former executive assistant and public liaison for Jason Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Global Travel, Julian's most cunning rival in the luxury hospitality world. Her presence in dozens of press releases had gone unnoticed by the media, framed as simply part of the PR machine. But to those who knew what to look for, her role had been far more significant. She was the human face of Harmony Trails, the same ethical volunteer tourism program Julian had long suspected of being a front for exploitation. Eva had accompanied Jason on site visits, appeared in promotional videos, and written blog posts filled with carefully curated hope, until, very suddenly, she disappeared. Julian stared at the image on his screen, a photo of Eva, smiling but tired, standing beside Jason at a groundbreaking ceremony in Cambodia. Her eyes, even then, told a story no headline had captured. He sat back in his chair, breathing deeply. It all made a disturbing kind of sense now. The fear in her voice, the avoidance of hospitals, the tattoo, the way she sometimes froze at sudden sounds. She had been deep inside Jason's empire, and she had run. A knock on the door snapped him from his thoughts. Mrs. Glynn peeked in. "She's in the garden, sir." Julian walked down slowly. Eva stood by the roses, gently touching a new bud. She looked up at him and smiled, but it faded quickly when she saw the look on his face. "You found something?" she said quietly. He nodded. "I know who you are now." Eva lowered her eyes. Then you probably also know why I tried so hard to forget." There was no anger in his tone, only pain. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to be that girl anymore, the one who smiled beside a monster who helped him sell lies." Julian waited. Eva exhaled shakily. "At first I believed in it. Jason said we were building something better. I wanted to believe that so badly. But then I started seeing things. The children who worked behind the camera, the money that never reached the villages, the local officials suddenly driving new cars. When I asked questions, he told me I was naive. When I pushed harder, he turned cruel." Her voice dropped. "He never hit me, but he didn't have to. Words can cage you too." Julian clenched his fists. "And the USB?" She nodded. "I copied files, emails, contracts, payment records. I was going to give them to a journalist, but someone tipped him off. I ran." Silence stretched between them. "You were brave to leave. You didn't deserve any of what happened to you." "I'm not brave," she said. "I'm just tired." Julian looked at her for a long moment. "You're not alone anymore." But fate was cruel. That afternoon the storm broke. Jason Caldwell himself appeared on national media, seated in an immaculately lit office, calm and calculated. With a measured smile, he addressed the rumors of a missing former employee and data theft. "Unfortunately," Jason said smoothly, "Mrs. Ava Raines is a troubled young woman. She disappeared months ago with proprietary company data, and now she's resurfaced, conveniently living with my business rival, Mr. Julian West." He paused, letting the insinuation sink in. "Make no mistake," he added, "this is not coincidence. This is corporate sabotage." The headlines ignited within minutes. Caldwell accuses rival of harboring corporate spy. Who is Eva Raines, heroine or hacker? Julian West's mystery woman linked to scandal. Julian's phone rang non-stop. PR agents, shareholders, attorneys, board members demanded explanations. Crisis mode activated. Eva watched it unfold from the edge of the room, numb and pale. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to drag you into this." Julian walked over and gently took her hand. "You didn't drag me into anything," he said, his voice low and steady. "They did." She looked at him, eyes wide with disbelief. "Jason doesn't scare me," Julian continued. "I've dealt with him in boardrooms for years, but this time it's not just business, it's personal." Eva's voice broke. "They'll tear you apart for protecting me." Julian squeezed her hand tighter. "Then let them try." And in that moment, for the first time since she had run, Eva didn't feel like she was running anymore. The headlines were merciless. From PR girl to PR scandal, who really is Eva Raines? Caldwell's ex and West's new flame. Coincidence or corporate conspiracy? The woman between two empires. Online forums dissected her life, every archived photo, every blog post she had ever written for Harmony Trails. Her face was plastered on news tickers, dissected by talk show hosts. Half painted her as a cunning manipulator, the other half as a tragic beauty wrapped in scandal. And in every photo that surfaced, she looked more like a symbol than a human being. Eva stopped reading them after the third day, but even if she shut the screens, she could not shut out the whispers, the stares when she tried to buy groceries, the subtle way conversations paused when she walked into the room, the voicemails from people she had once called friends, some expressing disbelief, others disgust. Two-faced, social climber, probably planned it from the start. The pain was sharpest when it came from people she had once trusted, but nothing stung quite like hearing the words from the mouth of Julian's board. "We understand your personal life is your own," said one executive, voice tight with forced civility. "But the brand, Julian, the brand must remain clean. Your relationship with Ms. Raines is compromising the public image of the company," added another. "Investors are nervous. Our Southeast Asia expansion deal has already stalled." "You need to choose," the CFO concluded flatly. "Either you publicly distance yourself from this woman, or we bring in interim leadership." Julian didn't speak. He simply rose, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without another word. That night, Eva found him standing alone on the terrace, overlooking the city skyline. His hands were braced on the railing, jaw tense. "You should let me go," she said quietly behind him. Julian didn't turn. "I never wanted to be a liability to you." Now he turned. His expression was unreadable. "You're not a liability." "I'm chaos," Eva said. "People hate me. They hate that I ran. They hate that I survived. They think I'm using you, and honestly, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore." Julian stepped closer. "Then let me remind you." His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "You reminded me why I started all of this. Why I built my hotels near local villages, not on top of them. Why I said no to bribes, to easy deals, to Caldwell's way of doing business." He took her hands gently. "You reminded me what it means to care, to choose what's right, even when it's hard. You reminded me that I'm more than a name on a skyscraper." Tears welled in her eyes. "Julian," he brushed a thumb across her cheek, "you don't need me to protect you. But I need you to remind me how to live with purpose." A week later, at the International Humanitarian Gala in Geneva, the world watched. Cameras clicked, flashes strobed, whispers flurried as Julian West entered the grand hall, his arm around Eva Raines. She wore a midnight blue gown, simple and elegant. Her posture was calm, though her fingers trembled in his. They were seated at the front. The moment everyone waited for came, when Julian stepped up to the podium to deliver the keynote. He looked out over the glittering crowd of executives, diplomats, journalists. "I was told," he began, voice clear, "that my presence here tonight might reflect poorly on this organization, because of the woman I chose to bring with me." There was a murmur. He paused, then continued. "Eva Raines was once part of a company that betrayed the very values this room claims to celebrate. But when she discovered the truth, she did not stay silent. She did not turn away. She walked away from privilege, from security, from the career she built, and she did it alone." He looked toward her. Her eyes were glossy. "And then I, someone who spent my life building an empire around ideals, found myself too afraid to stand beside her." The room fell into a hush. "Well, not anymore," he said, voice strong. "She does not need my protection, but I need her clarity. I need her courage. I need her to remind me that doing the right thing is not always safe, but it is always worth it." A pause. "So yes," Julian said, lifting his chin, "I am proud to be here with her, and if that offends anyone's brand, then your values were never real to begin with." For a moment the room was silent. Then came the applause. Slow at first, then stronger, until it rose like a wave. Julian stepped down and returned to Eva's side. She stood as he approached, and he pulled her into his arms, their foreheads touching in the center of that blinding room full of judgment. And in that moment, neither of them felt judged. They felt free. The file was only 74 megabytes. It could have fit on any flash drive, uploaded in seconds, forwarded to any number of journalists Eva had once worked with. And yet, the weight of it felt far heavier than its digital footprint. Because what it contained, emails, payment trails, manipulated charity reports, internal memos about falsified volunteer programs, wasn't just data. It was evidence of everything she had once stood beside, and now it would become the thing she would stand against. Julian sat beside her in his study as she sent the final encrypted transfer to the International Press and Legal Watchdog Group. She did not tremble, she did not flinch, but her fingers hovered over the send button just long enough for him to gently place his hand on hers. "You're not alone," he said softly. She pressed send. Within hours, the media storm reignited, but this time the lightning struck in the right direction. Whistleblower releases damning data against Caldwell Global, former insider exposes exploitation in volunteer tourism empire, Jason Caldwell, under formal investigation by International Labor Rights Commission. Jason Caldwell's smug grin vanished from the airwaves. He was summoned for questioning. Investors pulled out. His PR team issued the usual hollow statements about compliance reviews and unforeseen errors. But the damage was done. Eva's name was no longer whispered as a scandal. It was shouted as a reckoning. But the truth, like fire, did not burn only its targets. Collateral came swiftly. Within days, Julian received word that 3 of his Asian investment partners were backing out of their joint ventures. Not publicly, of course. They cited logistical timing and market conditions. But he knew the truth. Too close to controversy, too risky, too aligned with a woman who had once been inside the machine. Brand loyalty wavered. Shareholders murmured. Julian's advisors tried to spin it, focus on Western markets, rebrand as a more socially conscious alternative. But he knew that wouldn't be enough. So he made the decision himself. He stepped down as CEO, passed the baton to his longtime COO, issued a single, dignified press release stating he would be refocusing on local initiatives and community-based tourism, and then he left the city with Eva. They retreated to a quiet place in the mountains where the air smelled of pine and mist, and the only sound at night was the wind rustling the trees. It was where Julian had built his first property, a rustic eco-lodge, before success had turned him into a global name. It had stood empty for years. Now it became their refuge, their reset. They lived simply. Mornings started with coffee brewed over a gas stove. Afternoons were spent walking forest trails, and evenings often ended curled beside the fire, reading aloud or listening to the rain. For the first time in years, Julian slept deeply, and Eva dreamed without fear. But peace, even in its softest form, never fully silences the ache of what was lost. One evening, the rain came harder than usual, steady, unrelenting. The sky was bruised with thunderclouds and the mountain air turned sharp. Eva stood on the porch, wrapped in a sweater too large for her, watching the storm roll across the valley. Julian joined her, his steps quiet. For a while they said nothing, only the sound of rain. Then she turned to him. "If you could start over," she said, her voice barely above the wind, "if you could go back before you ever found me in that park, would you still stop?" He looked at her, his eyes steady. "Eva, I'm not asking because I doubt you," she said. I need to hear it. After everything, the scandal, the board, your company, everything we gave up. Was it worth it?" Julian reached out, brushing her damp hair behind her ear. "If I could live it all again," he said slowly, "I would still choose to walk that same path." Her eyes shimmered. "Even if the world didn't choose us?" she whispered. He pulled her into his arms. "I choose you, Eva, even if the world never does." She clutched his shirt, burying her face against his chest as the rain poured harder, but around them it felt like the sky was washing something clean. In that quiet mountain lodge, stripped of titles, scandals, and wealth, they stood not as symbols, not as sacrifices, but simply as 2 people who had chosen each other when it was hardest. And that made their love something more than storybook. It made it real. The old lodge had become more than a home. After stepping away from the spotlight, Julian and Eva rebuilt not only the space but its purpose. What was once the seed of a luxury empire became the heart of something more meaningful. Together they launched a program for women who had survived hardship, widows, single mothers, and survivors of abuse. Many had once labored invisibly behind tourism's polished fronts. Now they were learning to lead. Julian taught business basics, how to manage guest stays, design hiking tours, and build ethical partnerships. But it was Eva who gave the program its soul. She stood before every group, never claiming to be anything more than someone who had once been broken too. With honesty, she shared her journey, from standing beside powerful men to running from their shadows. "I thought losing everything would break me," she once said. "But it only stripped away what was never real." Her words sparked something deep in the women. And beyond the lodge, her memoir, The Quiet Exit, found a publisher and a voice. What moved Eva most weren't the sales, but the letters. From women in shelters, from young girls hiding truths, from people who simply wrote, "You made me feel seen." Julian watched her flourish. Stronger, freer, more radiant than ever. And as he watched, he realized he didn't just love her, he deeply admired her. So on the morning of their program's official launch, with pine trees overhead and a handmade banner swaying in the breeze, Julian stepped forward. A small crowd of locals and guests clapped as he took the mic. "This lodge was where I once learned how to build a business," he said. "But today, we begin building something greater. Community." He paused. His eyes found Eva. "And before we begin, I want to ask someone very important to join me up here." Eva blinked, surprised, as he held out his hand. She stepped forward, unsure, her heart already racing. Julian looked at the audience, then back at her. "The day I met Eva, she looked like someone who didn't want to be found. But I found myself the moment I found her." He pulled a small box from his pocket. As he opened it, sunlight broke through the clouds. "I don't want a brand or a legacy," he said softly. "I just want to be the man who walks beside you, through whatever life brings." He knelt. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. They embraced as the crowd erupted, not just for love, but for two people who chose to begin again. That night, beneath a sky full of stars, Eva rested her head on Julian's shoulder. "Did you plan all of it?" she asked. He kissed her forehead. "I planned a very different life," he murmured. "But then I found you, and in that quiet, nothing else was needed." 1 year later, the world had turned softer for them. Nestled between towering cliffs and a private stretch of shoreline, a handcrafted wooden house stood, kissed by sea breeze and wildflowers. Once just a vision drawn in the back of Julian's notebook, it had slowly become real. A retreat not just for guests, but for healing hearts. They called it the Driftwood Home, a mini resort with only 5 cabins, each designed with care, each offering peace, not luxury. Eva and Julian lived in the main house, where the sound of the ocean greeted them every morning and stars watched over their sleep at night. Eva's belly had rounded into the gentle curve of early motherhood. She moved with that special glow, half peace, half anticipation, her hands often resting protectively over the child growing within her. Julian wrote now, not business plans, but pages of reflection and truth. His manuscript, Sustainable by Heart, was almost finished. It wasn't about profit margins or expansion strategy. It was about rebuilding the soul of an industry that had forgotten the people it was supposed to serve. He wrote about the villages forgotten after tourist seasons faded, about the workers with no voice, and most of all, about the moment his life changed, not when he closed his first billion-dollar deal, but when he found Eva on a rainy night, lost and trembling. Eva spent her mornings in the herb garden and her afternoons answering letters from readers of her memoir. She had launched a small podcast, Voices Between the Lines, where she interviewed survivors of emotional and corporate abuse, helping them rewrite their narratives. She never called herself a healer, but those who listened often said her voice felt like one. Life was no longer fast, it was rich. One rainy afternoon, just as the tide began to rise, Eva sat curled on the porch swing with a steaming cup of peppermint tea. Julian joined her, a blanket thrown over both their laps. They didn't speak for a while. The rain was soft, like a lullaby tapping on the wooden roof. Inside their cozy living room, the fireplace crackled. On the mantel sat their most cherished photo, a candid shot, captured by a staff member, of Julian holding Eva under a storm in the garden the night she nearly walked away. Rain blurred their outlines, but what remained clear was how tightly they held each other. Eva looked at it now, a wistful smile tugging at her lips. "I used to think," she said slowly, "that I was just a traveler, a wanderer with no destination, someone who didn't belong anywhere." Julian turned to her, "And I was a man building places for others to stay, without ever building a place to rest my own heart." She smiled, eyes glistening. "Funny, isn't it, how we both thought we were lost? And all the while," he murmured, "we were walking toward each other." The wind picked up slightly and Julian stood. He reached for her hand. "Come with me," he said. She raised an eyebrow but followed. They walked slowly, down the stone path, past the cabins, to a new wooden archway that overlooked the sea. On it was a hand-carved sign, "The Place We Stayed." Beneath it, Julian had placed a bench. On the backrest, etched into the wood, were the words, "Found in the rain, chosen in the calm." Eva touched it, overcome. "It's for you," Julian said quietly. "For us, For every moment we chose to stay, even when the world told us to run." She sat down and he joined her. They watched the waves roll in, felt the soft spray of salt on their skin. Julian took her hand. "Whatever comes, this child, this life, know one thing. I'm not going anywhere." Eva leaned her head on his shoulder. "Neither am I." And just like that, with no grand gestures or headlines, they had everything. The world didn't need to understand them. They understood each other, and that was enough. As the sun dipped low, casting gold across the waves, Julian kissed Eva's temple and whispered, "We didn't start like a fairy tale, but I'd take this ending over any crown or castle." Eva looked up at him and smiled. "Because it's real," she said, "because we built it together." And together they stayed, softly, fiercely, completely. At last they were home. If this story stirred something in your heart, made you believe again in love that heals, in second chances, and in the quiet power of choosing each other, then this is exactly the kind of story we love to tell. Julian and Eva didn't start with perfection. They started with pain, with mistrust, with the scars of a past they never asked for. But what made their story beautiful was not that it was easy, it was that it was real. If you believe in the kind of love that grows through storms, in the kind of courage it takes to stay when everything says run, then we invite you to stay with us too. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more heartfelt journeys like this. Stories of resilience, stories of hope, stories that remind us we're never truly lost, we're just on our way home. Don't forget to like, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could touch your soul. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and keep believing in love.